Hello, and welcome to the Request for Proposal Grant Writing Workshop. I'm Kristen Wood-Hagner, the new VAWA Grant Administrator at the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission, also known as CVRC. Today is Friday, February 24th, 2023, and we're going to talk about the State Fiscal Year 2024 Request for Proposal for the Stop Violence Against Women Act program, which we issued the solicitation for on Monday, February 20th, 2023. This webinar is intended to assist continuation programs and competitive programs in the grant writing process. This project is supported by the federal grant number 15 JOVW-22-GG-00441-STOP of the Stop Violence Against Women program. The opinions, findings, conclusions, and recommendations expressed in this video are those of the New Mexico Crime Victims Reparation Commission and do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of the Department of Justice or the Office of Violence Against Women. The mission of the Stop Violence Against Women program is to encourage states to develop and strengthen the criminal justice system's response to violence against women and to support and enhance services for survivors of these crimes. Despite its title, the Violence Against Women Act, or VAWA, focuses on services for adult victims of all genders and gender identities who have experienced intimate partner violence, sexual violence, dating violence, or stalking. An adult victim of any of these crimes cannot be denied services on the basis of gender or gender identity under VAWA. VAWA also covers services for children, but only as secondary victims or as witnesses to intimate partner violence. The Stop Violence Against Women program in CVRC adhere to a strategic implementation plan for the state and federal funds administered by our office, which includes the Stop VAWA funding we're talking about today. The plan sets priorities and builds on each subsequent year of funding. The proposals for these funds, like what you'll be submitting for the Stop VAWA, are based upon this plan and the priorities. We have a new implementation plan that was adopted on June 16th last year, and you can download that from WebGrants. If you're not familiar with WebGrants yet, don't worry, we'll discuss that in more detail later in this webinar. If you'll be submitting an application for competitive funding, opposed to continuation funds, you will especially want to look at the concise goals and objectives on page 30 through 32, and the description of how STOP funding will be used to meet the goals and objectives within the specific discipline you're applying under. So victim services, law enforcement, prosecution, or court. You'll also want to look on pages 38 and 39 to find how the funding will be used for underserved communities and cross-cutting efforts, which are multidisciplinary efforts and systems level improvements like co-located services or cross-system data collection. Pages 30 through 40 of the implementation plan will be very helpful as you write your proposal because you will have to show how your plan aligns with these goals and objectives. This is a very important part of your proposal, and we'll refer back to the implementation plan throughout the webinar. To be eligible for Stop VAWA funding, applicants must be able to present their organizational capacity to complete the mandatory elements outlined within their proposal. CVRC has determined that applications will be ineligible for consideration if they are late, incomplete, or fail any of the mandatory elements outlined within the RFP. So again, proposals are due on March 20th at 4:00 p.m. Mountain Time. At 4:01 Mountain Time on March 20th, WebGrants won't even let you submit an application. Your application will not be able to be considered. If you're applying for continuation funds, it's important to understand the 4-year cycle. And you can read more about this in the RFP. It shows you the amount of the funding that's available from our Stop VAWA funding strategy. The amount is dependent upon continuation and competitive funding. All programs who receive funding and maintain good standing, both programmatically and financially, and continue to apply for continuation funds, will receive funding for 4 years, unless it's something like a non-recurring project, like a one-time conference. Continuing agencies receive the original amount for the first 2 years. And then there are reductions in funding by 10% in year 3, and then again in year 4, an additional 10%. For the 5th year, the agency is considered a new applicant again and must apply in the competitive process. So if your original award was $100 in the first year, then in year 2, you're going to get $100 again. But in year 3, there's going to be a 10% reduction of the original award, so you'll only get $90. And then in year 4, there'd be another 10% reduction, 10% from the original award. So it's a total of a 20% reduction from the original award. So you'll only get $80 in year 4. And then year 5, you apply as a new applicant. The next section of the implementation plan covers the mandatory stop VAWA allocations. Federal guidelines dictate that we must award at least 25% of these funds for prosecution purposes, at least 25% for law enforcement, at least 30% for victim services, and at least 5% for court purposes. And the court funds must go directly to a court. Remember, for victim services, they must be for the VAWA eligible crimes of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. These services can include hotlines, legal advocacy, shelters, crisis intervention, and others. So if you're applying for victim services funding, make sure to read that section on page 40 in the implementation plan so you know which services are eligible for stop VAWA. There's also a sexual assault set aside where at least 20% of the stop VAWA funds will continue to be allocated towards sexual violence across at least 2 categories. Projects counted toward this set aside must meet the standards established by the New Mexico Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs. Historically, we have also worked toward equitable distribution of stop VAWA funds between sexual violence and domestic violence service providers. Previously, stop VAWA funds were used to establish the New Mexico Intimate Partner Death Review Team, which is a multidisciplinary group of professionals who meet regularly to review cases involving deaths related to intimate partner violence and sexual assault, and produce an annual report with recommendations. The current implementation plan addresses all the recommendations from the 2021 report, and the relevant VAWA eligible recommendations have been incorporated directly into the goals and objectives we discussed earlier. You can read the full list of recommendations in Appendix D of the implementation plan. Pages 45 through 48 discuss addressing the needs of underserved victims. This is an important section of your proposal for a couple of reasons. First, of the 30% of stop VAWA funds that are allocated for victim services, at least 10% of that must be allocated for culturally specific community-based organizations, though we typically do significantly more than that 10% in our state. Also, priority consideration is given to proposals that specifically improve services for populations with access barriers due to race, ethnicity, language, disability, sexual orientation, age, or geography. Community collaboration is the #1 reason why proposals are disqualified. There is a congressional mandate that applicants demonstrate how they have coordinated with victim service providers and governmental service providers in the community. Agencies must work together. We're not one entity working alone in a vacuum. It's important to note that participation in a coordinated community response or a multidisciplinary team does not meet this criteria. You have to collaborate and establish meetings with community partners such as nonprofits and other governmental agencies who are providing victim services in the development of this proposal. It's not something that you could have done a year ago or 6 months ago. It has to have been done within the time frame of the solicitation, the RFP being issued, and it has to demonstrate that your agency collaborated with other victim service providers in the community to develop this proposal. If a proposal does not include community collaboration, it will be deemed ineligible. Now let's go over the request for proposal, or RFP, and how to submit a proposal. The RFP can be downloaded from web grants at nmcvrc.com, or I'm sorry, nmcvrcgrants.com, and it's attached to the solicitation announcement that's being distributed statewide. Before you start your proposal, you may want to have the implementation plan and RFP handy so you can easily refer back to them. It's important to familiarize yourself with the content of these two documents because your proposal needs to support the priorities established in the implementation plan and the core priority services of the Violence Against Women Act. And the RFP details the proposal requirements, the process, and timeline. Mary Ellen would actually print out the RFP and color code different items. The deadlines would be one color, and she would put the dates in her calendar and even add a reminder in her calendar a few days earlier. When you're adding deadlines to your calendar, please pay close attention to the time that some of the items are due. If items are submitted after the designated time, they will not be accepted. I want to point out important dates that you may want to add to your calendar now. Your proposal is due at 4 o'clock Mountain Time on March 20th, and the last date to ask a question about the proposal process is actually a few days earlier on March 17th at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. You'll do that through web grants, asking a question, and we'll talk about how that works in just a moment. Preliminary award notifications will go out on April 27th, and this is the start of the protest period if you disagree with a decision. You'll have until May 8th at 10 o'clock a.m. to protest, and there's a process to do that that we'll cover later in the webinar. The final award notifications will be released on May 25th, and your nearest upcoming deadline is registering in web grants by March 17th. So let's show you how to do that now. So there are many things you can do in web grants. This is where you have to register, you can add new users to the application, you can ask a question, and this is where you'll submit your proposal as well. But I don't want to stay on this screen. Let's actually go into web grants now. You can navigate to web grants by going to nmcvrcgrants.com and start the registration process by clicking register here. If you already have an account in web grants, you don't need to register again. If you have other staff in your agency who will need to access web grants, they will need to use their own login. They shouldn't be using yours. And they would also have to register in web grants before the deadline. Before we register, we recommend watching the registration instructions on the CVRC YouTube channel, which is where you're watching this video now. And having the registration instructions document easily accessible so you can refer to it step by step as you register. And you should have had this in the email you received as an attachment with the RFP. Once you submit your registration, so you'll complete this, click I'm not a robot, and then register. The information will be sent to CVRC for approval. CVRC will then approve your registration and attach you to the correct organization, and then you'll receive an email with your login information. This process can take a little bit of time, and that's why it's important to register by March 17th. So you have time to get your login information and then submit your proposal. But we strongly recommend registering earlier. Once you're set up in web grants and you have questions related to the RFP and your proposal, you must submit your questions through web grants. You cannot reach out to an individual at CVRC to help you with your proposal. If you email us a question, we cannot respond to them, so your question will go unanswered. To ask a question in web grants, log in, and this is our tester account here. Click funding opportunities, then click into the grant. So we want to stop violence against women. And then you'll see ask a question right here. And you'll type your question in here in the question box, and then you'll hit save. Once you submit your question, it'll post, and everyone who is registered will be able to see your question and all the other submitted questions along with CVRC's responses. This keeps the process equitable because everyone has access to the same information. Just to remind you, the last opportunity to submit a question is March 17th. no later than 4 Mountain Time, 4 o'clock p.m. Mountain Time. And remember, if that's also the same deadline to register in web grants. So if you wait to the deadline to register, then you won't have time to ask a question. So again, we recommend starting that process early. At 4:01 p.m. on March 17th, web grants will not even allow you to submit a question. So again, highly encourage you to start your proposal early and start asking your questions right away to ensure that you get the answers you need. I'm going to go back to the menu page. If you get lost, you can always go back to the menu page. Takes you here, so you have all your options. Let's go back into funding opportunities. And we're going to go again into the Stop VAWA grants. And once questions start coming in, they'll all appear down here at the bottom so everyone can see them. And then you'll also be able to see CVRC's responses to all the questions. Okay, so let's go back and go to menu, funding opportunities, VAWA. And now if you have applied before and you're going to apply for continuation funds, or maybe you're in your 5th year and so you need to submit as a new competitive process, you can click copy existing application to start the application for your proposal this year. You can find a previous application for the same grant, click it, then hit save. So I'm copying the one from fiscal year 2019, but if you had one in fiscal year 23, that would be a good one to start with. And now, because I've copied it, it has pre-populated all the information that was submitted before, but if I need to make a change, I can go to edit. And here's primary contact. It's still testing tester. I can add Joe Hughes as a grantee contact. I've selected them. If you have new users, this is also where they'll appear because we've added them to your organization, and you can highlight that individual there, and that's how you would add them to your application. And this is still the title of it. We have fiscal year 24 in there. And then I'm going to hit save. And this is what you'll see if you started a new application as well. Then I'm going to go back. I always use the menu items here to navigate web grants, not the menu items up here. Okay, then the next section of your application, and this will look the same if you copied an application or if you started a new one. The first section is the next section is the Stop VAWA application, and you'll add your project type, whether you're a continuation project, if you have funds from the last 3 years, you'll be a continuation project. If you're a competitive new project, so that's if you're brand new or if you hit your 5th year and you need to apply as a competitive new project. You'll indicate your targeted communities and counties. Then what kind of project are you? Are you asking for funds for prosecution, law enforcement, victim services? Are you a court? Again, for the court funds, you need to specifically be a court. Or do you have another ask? So are you registered in SAM? It needs to be yes. You need to put your SAM expiration date in there. And this used to be your DUNS number, but now they're called UEIs for unique identity. Unique entity identity. And this is a 12-character sequence that you'll be able to find. And if you have questions about how to find that, there's instructions in the RFP. Next, you'll enter your project summary. This is just a brief explanation. It correlates to your project and how the proposed project fits within the 2022-2025 statewide implementation plan. Throughout the proposal sections, we highly encourage you to remember that the project summary, the primary project components, the narrative, and the budget all need to support each other and be aligned with each other. For example, if you have in your project summary that you want to support a prosecutor, but your narrative is talking about the need for additional victim advocates, and your budget has an investigator, the proposal review committee is going to say, wait a minute, the summary is saying this, but the budget's saying this, and the narrative is saying that. So it's really important that you really look at ensuring that the summary aligns with the budget, the goals and objectives, and the narratives. So you might want to keep coming back to here and making sure everything's aligning. But once you complete all of this, you have your financial officer, your authorized official information. They may be the same as the finance officer, they may be different. And then is this person responsible for reporting civil rights? If both of these are no, you'll get a drop down, and then you'll enter the information for the other person. Once you complete that, you'll go back up to the top and click save. It's not going to let me save because I have not completed all the required fields with the red asterisks. And I'll say okay, and I'll just go back. Okay. If I have completed this, I can mark it as complete. It's not going to let me do it because I have not entered the information. But once you have, you'll be able to mark it as complete. Go back. And then a little check mark would appear here under complete. Next section is the Stop VAWA Federal Purpose Areas. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013 has 20 federal purpose areas, and your proposal must fit within at least one of these areas. And the act also dictates that it aligns with the state implementation plan. So again, you'll go back to our strategic implementation plan and look at the goals and objectives. And so that's that page 30 through 40. You'll look at the concise goals, and then you'll look at your specific discipline. And you can download all the purpose areas on web grants at nmcvrc.com. And they also all appear in the application itself. So you'll scroll down and you have to say yes or no to each one. You'll read through and find which ones fit best with your proposal. And then once you've selected an answer for every single one, you'll hit save, and then we'll go back. The next section is the VAWA narrative. And there are 7 topics. The first 6 topics are required if you're applying as a new proposal in the competitive process. And the 7th topic is the only one required if you're applying for continuation funds. In topic 1, this is the section where you'll want to provide a comprehensive description of your agency's work with survivors. This should be an overview of your entire organization, focusing on the divisions that work specifically on the proposed project. Please describe who your organization is, and know that the proposal review committee is comprised of people who understand the makeup of survivor services, both governmental and non-governmental, across our states. This is an opportunity to describe your organization and be candid about the services that you are and are not providing. If this is funding that's needed to support sustainability, to continue doing great work, then say that. Be honest about this. It is intended to continue the great work that you're doing, or this is intended to address something that you've seen. The next section, topic 2, please make sure that you're identifying the target population, that this aligns with the goals and objectives we'll be addressing, and that it's clear throughout the budget which positions are going to support that. So identify the demographics of the target population that the project will serve. This should be clear and accurate. And again, it should support the problem statement. Narrative 3, what is the nature of the problem that is proposed that the project will address? Let's go into topic 3 a little more. Topic 3 is about your problem statement. You want a strong, persuasive presentation of the problem. You want to be clear and concise, giving a picture of the problem in your community. This is going to be the backbone of your proposal, and all the other elements of your proposal are going to be based on this problem statement. Everything is going to go back to this problem statement. This is, why do you need the money? What is the purpose of this? What is the presentation of your problem? Everything, again, should be tied back to topic number 3. Your summary should be tied to topic number 3. Your budget should align with topic number 3. Your goals and objectives should align with topic number 3. Weak problem statements, and if you have a proposal that doesn't keep tying back to your problem statement, indicate to the review committee that the applicant organization might not understand the problem and its nature, or maybe the organization is not prepared to have a significant impact on the problem. Questions to ask yourself and to address in the problem statements are, how many people will be affected? Can you prove it? Is your proof anecdotal? Are there statistics that can back you up? Are there not statistics? If there aren't statistics, why not? What's happening within your community, within your agency, within the state that you need to address? What's the impact going to be on the criminal justice system and the targeted region that you're addressing? In this section, you want to use numbers. You want to use data to substantiate your needs. So we want data that's current, accurate, relevant to the problem statement, quantitative. So again, going back to numbers, you can use surveys, focus groups. There's a lot of information in our state. You can get the Intimate Partner Death Review Team report, use the Sexual Violence and Domestic Violence Repository data. There's a lot of research in our state. You can go to all 3 coalitions, the Domestic Violence Coalition, the Sexual Assault Coalition, and the Coalition to Stop Violence Against Native Women, to gather information that's collected to really support why you have an understanding of the need of your program, of your agency, and why you're applying for these funds. So this is where you're building the argument that this is the problem that you're going to address. Next, let's go back to our proposal. This is again in the narrative section, topic 4, identifying underserved populations. So how will these populations be affected? How will you provide linguistically and culturally accessible services? You want to identify the underserved populations in your regions and the barriers encountered in accessing services, how many people are affected, and describe how the project will provide, again, linguistically, culturally, and accessible services. In topic 4, you can also include training of your organization's staff by underserved populations. Topic 5, here's one of the questions about your proposal's alignment with the implementation plan and the federal purpose areas. So again, you want to have those documents ready and be familiar with those. How do you address the implementation plan and the federal purpose areas? It's very important to talk about how this proposal is meeting the needs that we as a state have identified as goals for our state, and how we're meeting the conditions of VAWA and those federal purpose areas. Topic 6 is where you identify your project partners candidly and honestly. We've had proposals where people identify that they're partners with an organization, but then the review committee knows that these 2 agencies don't even participate in each other's meetings. They're having independent meetings and siloing services because they're not collaborating in their communities. So again, you need to demonstrate how you're having meaningful collaboration. Your response to this question can also identify how you're addressing siloing and lack of collaboration. And remember, everything we've covered so far in the narrative, topics 1 through 6, are optional for continuation applications, and they're truly optional. You don't have to do those. So if you're doing continuation funds or a continuation application, really just focus on topic number 7. And topic 7 is still required for new applications as well. So if you're new, topics 1 through 7, If you're a continuation application, just topic 7. This topic is, again, it's mandatory for everyone, and you must describe your limited English proficiency and accessibility plans and how your agency supports those costs, including transportation barriers, limited English proficiency, and resources for deaf and hard of hearing. And we'll go into that a little bit more later in the presentation too. Okay, now that you've filled out all your answers, you want to click Save, and then we'll go back to the application. And the next section is Primary Project Components. Primary Project Components, or PPCs, this section is your game plan, your roadmap. The goals here need to be measurable with supporting activities on a timeline with an evaluation process. You'll establish a goal statement, and this is not a societal goal. This is not, we're going to end gender-based violence, we're going to achieve world peace. That's not a realistic or reasonable goal. It's a goal that relates to the problem you wrote about in your response to question number 3. Again, we're always going to go back to that problem statement and how you're going to identify it and how you're going to address it. For example, you can increase the number of domestic violence victims who receive legal assistance, then obtain orders of protection. I want you to notice this is different than reducing the incidence of domestic violence in the county. This is something that's measurable, that you can control. This goal statement, again, it must flow logically from the problem statement. If in your problem statement, you were discussing the need and justification for civil legal assistance, but here you're talking about a reduction in domestic violence as your goal statement, that's not appropriate. That doesn't flow logically from your problem statements. Next step of your PPCs is to develop measurable objectives. When you develop these goals and objectives, they have to be measurable. So we're talking about how many, how much. We're going to have numbers here. You're going to use words like maintain, increase, decrease, enhance. You're going to say, I'm going to improve prosecution rates by 20%. Tell us what the improvement is going to be. What's the starting base? What does your situation look like now and how you're going to improve it? If prosecution is at 7% conviction rate now, for example, and you want to improve that to 20%, then we need to know what that change is going to look like. Really letting the proposal review committee know that you understand the goal, how you're going to implement it, and what your objective is. Then the next step is implementing activities and then impact evaluation activity. So implementing activities are what you have to do to carry out the objectives that you just developed. And these should be listed within a timeline. So they're going to be time bound. When are these going to be performed? And then impact evaluation activities are how you will show the impact of your program. So did you reach your objectives? How do you know you reached your objectives? How are you going to, what activities are you going to do to measure that? So you can answer this question if you can prove that your implementing activities were actually carried out, and if you can measure the increase or decrease or other changes to the degree that your objectives stated. So here's an example of a primary project component. You can read more examples of primary project components in the RFP. So again, I highly recommend going back and familiarizing yourself with that example or with that document. So here's an example about providing training to law enforcement in San Juan County by conducting 1 training per quarter. And it's giving you something that's measurable and on a timeline. So you can see in the goals, we have goal number 1. You can have multiple goals. And then measurable objectives. And here we have 1A, conduct 1 training. And you can have multiple measurable objectives per goal. So 1A implies that there's a 1B, and then implementing activities, we can see the same thing. We have 2 listed there for that first goal. And this is how we're going to implement that measurable objective. We're conducting a training. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to develop a PowerPoint on that same topic. And then we're going to collaborate And we're going to have meaningful collaboration with the Coalition of Sexual Assault Programs to approve the training materials. And then the way we're going to the way we're going to evaluate, we're going to measure our impact from these implementing activities, how we're going to know that we reached our objective is we're going to maintain copies of the PowerPoints and agendas and sign-in sheets and the evaluation forms where we get feedback from the attendees. And we're going to keep all of that electronically at the agency. So you can see here, you'll hit add to add one of your PPCs. Then you'll enter your goal, measurable objective here, implementing activity, who's going to do it, what quarter you're going to do that activity in, and then how you're going to know if you reached your objective by writing the activity that you'll have for impact evaluation. Then you'll click save, go back, and you'll add another one. When you've done all of them, you've put all of them in, then you can mark it as complete. The next section is the budget. To add an item to your budget, you find the category that your line item will be under, and then you click add. Add the description, your federal amount, and the match amount, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in just a second. So now you've got your narrative put together. Your narrative is built on your problem statement. It ties to your project summary. You looked at your goals and objectives and how you're going to know that this goal is met and how you're going to measure it. You've put all that together and then you give it to your CFO or whoever is going to put your budget together. There are some common issues that we see pop up as people are developing their budget. An example of a common problem we've seen is that you're asking for a prosecutor, but then your budget is asking for an advocate. That's a problem we've seen happen. So it's really important that you think about the goals, the measurable objectives, the narrative, and then planning the budgets. Because again, it's all got to tie together, and everyone who is working on your proposal needs to work together to make sure that the budget reflects the activities in the primary project components, those PPCs, and addresses the problem statement identified within the narrative. So planning the budget supports the problem statement and the activities. Is it realistic? Is this budget something that actually works for what you've proposed? Is it rounded off? So please do not submit a budget for any fractions of the dollars. If you want $25,000, say $25,000, not $24,739.42. You can have $25,742. That shows that you've really thought about the cost, but please don't ask for the 42 cents. Your proposed expenditures that are not supported in the PPCs or the narrative, really let the review committee know that there is a disconnect in this proposal. It's unrealistic, or your budget's too high, or it's too low. If there's $200,000 available and your application asks for the whole pot of money and you can't support it, it's unrealistic. It exceeds the requesting limit. It doesn't adhere to the grant guidelines, and it just really shows that you haven't really thought about the impact of the funding in your state and community. You do have to enter your budget into the application form that we just went over in web grants, and you need to follow the instructions. You need to round it off. You need to have the match clearly identified. Again, we're going to go over that in a second. The budget, the proposal, the review, the proposal narrative, and the PPCs all correspond with matching funds in a budget that's done right. Okay, let's talk about the matching funds now. The purpose of the matching funds is to increase the amount of resources available to the project supported by grant funds. Tribal and nonprofit, non-governmental agencies providing direct services do not have to provide matching funds. There are no financial match requirements for nonprofit, non-governmental victim service agencies. Everyone else has to provide a match, and only certain organizations are eligible for a match waiver. 25% of the total cost of the project is required as a match and must be derived from non-federal sources. In other words, a 25% in-kind or cash match is required for all others, and federal funds may not be used as your match. Any of our governmental entities like prosecution, law enforcement, and the courts cannot request a match waiver. There's no exception for governmental agencies. And all funds designated as a match, and this is important, are restricted to the same purposes as the federal funds, and they must be expended within the grant period. In the event that the total match requirement is not expended, the subgrantee will be required to refund the federal amount equivalents. Therefore, it's important to not overmatch, otherwise you're going to have to pay back to the federal government. The formula to determine your matching funds is by multiplying your federal funds requested times 25% divided by 75%. So let's use the example of $10,000. You request $10,000 from Stop VAWA, and you want to calculate your match. That you're going to multiply that by 0.25. Then you're going to divide that by 0.75, and your match will be $3,333. And again, your match can be in cash, or it could be a cash match, or it can be some ideas for in-kind matches are like donations of expendable equipment, office supplies. There's a whole list here. Just remember, your match has to be treated like the federal dollars. So you can't do office supplies if your agency's organizational budget is $100 million, and a $50,000 grant is not going to be worth matching supplies. The value placed on loaned or donated equipment may not exceed fair rental value. The value placed on donated services must be consistent with the rate of compensation paid for similar work in the organization or in the labor market. Service hours, if you're counting service hours, they have to be documented. Fringe benefits may be included in the valuation. Value placed on donated space may not exceed fair market value of comparable space as established by an independent appraisal of the comparable space and facilities in a privately owned building in the same locality. Basis for determining value of services, materials, equipment, and space must be documented. So it's really important to think about operations costs, monetary values. If you have volunteers, if you have interns, there's a lot of ways in which to find a match. The match waiver request form is available. It's in Web Grants. I'll show you in a moment. But it's only available for tribal and nonprofit governmental entities who are providing direct services. They can request a match waiver if they're seeking funds outside of those activities. And again, no exceptions for government agencies. Okay, so back in Web Grants, we've entered in all our line items in our budget. We've clicked Save, back. We can mark it as complete once it's done. Then here's the match waiver request form. Again, is this for a tribal or victim services organization that is not providing direct services to victims? That is the only possible qualification for the waiver. So we click yes, and then the rest of the form appears and we complete it. Hit save, and then we can go back. The next section is the VAWA certification of consultation. To add an item to here, you click add. Then you'll complete the information of the contact you worked with, the victim service organization, and then you'll list the actual dates and content of the planning meetings with victim services the programs, and the advocates. All proposals must have a certification of consultation. Again, we're looking for a collaboration that is meaningful collaboration. It's meaningful and mandatory. Your organizations must demonstrate collaborative partnerships and resource sharing for mutual gain. This is a very important part of the proposal. The mission of the stock grants is to develop a partnership to decrease the incidence of violence against women. Again, we don't want to work in silos. Collaborative agencies should be part of the planning process and not just brought in only when you need an MOU or a support letter. Collaborative agencies should benefit by grant funding in some way, like training assistance, et cetera. If they're making a commitment to you, you should be making a commitment to them. Evidence of strong collaboration must be included in the proposal. MOUs or support letters should be specific. These are not mandatory. The support letters are not mandatory, but in a competitive process, the proposal that has strong MOUs or support letters has a strong advantage. Again, meaningful collaboration is so important. And the coordinated community responses and multidisciplinary teams, those are happening all the time and they should be happening. But collaboration and development of this proposal of your application is the requirement from VAWA. You have to really meaningful collaborate in the development of this application. The next section is additional documentation required. And there are several documents, and to add one, you click, let's say, job descriptions. And then you're going to choose a file, you click that, and the files from your computer will appear. You'll select them. You'll select the one that you want to upload, and then you'll add your description here. We'll show job description, and then you can say what position that was in your proposal, in your budget, and this will be the job description that will be of the position that you're asking for funding for. There are several documents that are required in this section. There are assurances, certifications from the federal government. There's also there is a new form called the Disclosure of Lobbying Activities. And you can find that to download if you go back again. And you can find that by clicking menu and then clicking funding opportunities, finding the grant we're applying for, the Stop VAWA grant, and scrolling all the way to the bottom. And attachments. And here's the federal certification forms to download. Here you can find the RFP to download. We will add today's PowerPoint here. And here is the disclosure of lobbying activities. And we have website links here. This is where you'll find the webinar that we're listening to now. And here is the NMCVRC YouTube channel where you can find all the previous webinars. You also have to attach job descriptions for proposed federal and match positions. You also have to include the contracts for actual or proposed consultants, and drafts of the contract are required. If applicable, you can submit the resumes of candidates. If the match positions are already filled, you need to provide that resume. If it's a new position, obviously you wouldn't have a resume yet. You need to submit your agency's most recent audit, your agency audit. Even if we have it on file, you have to submit it with the application. You need to include your current agency operational budget and the VAWA staff spreadsheet, which is a breakdown of all funded and matched staff with the allocation of the total salaries across the funding sources. If you're a 501c3, there are additional documents you need to provide. You need to provide proof of being a 501c3, your articles of incorporation, a roster of your current board members with their contact information, their occupation, and when their term started and when it's up. The next document you need to provide is your limited English Proficiency Plan. These are mandatory for everyone. All recipients of federal funds need to provide them. You must provide, again, meaningful access to resources and services, and the costs associated must be reasonable and in your budget. Again, you want those to align. And this plan must address services to individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing, or individuals with disabilities. They need to have meaningful access to programs and services and information. And it's important to include the percentage of limited English proficiency persons within your organization's eligible service population, and how frequently they come into contact with your organization. In summary, when you're building your proposal, carefully read the request for proposal packet. Make sure you know what the requirements are, when your deadlines are. Keep your proposal simple. You want it to be clear and concise. Choose your priority, develop your narrative, build your PPCs, and then establish your project budget. You want all of those in alignment with each other. So you're coordinating and collaborating with your teammates who are all working on your proposal. Everything should connect back to your problem statements. And you need to submit your proposal on time. The entire proposal needs to be in through Web Grants on March 20th, 2023, 4:00 p.m. Mountain Time. You submit it through nmcbrcgrants.com, that's Web Grants. And at 4:01, no submissions will be accepted. 4:00 is the absolute latest that we can accept it. Just remember that everything comes out of topic number 3, the problem statement, your goals, your consultation. If you're talking about increasing prosecution rates in your communities, but you're not meaningfully consulting with individuals who are working with survivors, you're not having that collaboration, or your project budget isn't for prosecutors, it's for an advocate, it really shows a disconnect. So make sure that everything ties back in to what you've identified as the problem statements. Proposal reviewers get confused when a document is too wordy or it's disorganized. Make sure your budget reflects your goals and objectives. An unrealistic or inflated or deflated budget can mean a credibility issue. So keep your budget realistic. And again, the deadline is not a guide, it is a cutoff point. For our continuation projects, you're not going to be doing a lot of those elements. You've already done them successfully, congratulations. But you will be attaching all those additional documents that are required, and you'll be doing question number 7, but you don't have to build all those pieces that are based on the problem statement as much. So again, just keep it clear and concise. Please proof your work. This is especially important if you are copying an application from a previous year, or you are copying and pasting from another document, or maybe you're in your 5th year and you're copying and pasting a PDF from one of your previous applications. Really proof your work, make sure that it cut and pasted properly, make sure that everything still applies and is up to date. Make sure that you're committed to the budget and it's not too big of a portion of the overall pot. Make sure that, again, you make sure you get it in on time. I cannot stress this enough, into the Web Grant system by the deadline of March 20th at 4:00. Thank you so much for joining us today. That is the Stop VAWA Fiscal Year 2024 Grant Writing Workshop. I hope that this webinar has been helpful to you. This YouTube video will be linked in the email and in Web Grants. And we hope that you will be able to submit a complete and successful proposal after watching this. We look forward to working with all of you, and we wish you the best of luck. Thank you.